For those of you who've witnessed this journey over the past year and seen us fall in love and get a real passion for this brand, Moto Guzzi, will have also seen that we have acquired 3 of our own V7s in our collection, the Carbon, the Centenario, and the Original Racer. Now, this model is the most popular, most loved in the Moto Guzzi range, and also its continuous production is over 50% of the 100-year history of the brand. And we've always wanted to find an original, unmolested, from the 60s V7 model. And here we have it, original 1969 V7. In our search for one of these original 60s V7, we thought we go to the source. And what better source than actually the president and the chief cook bottle washer of the South African IMOC, Italian Motorcycle Owner Club, the guy who's driving the club and has the passion for the Italian bikes. And that's where we met Phil. And now if you're here with me and look behind me, there's some serious Italian passion going on as well as Guzzi passion. And Phil, thank you for this opportunity to see your stunning bikes and touch them and sit on them. And tell me, where did your passion for this brand start?
My passion for Moto Guzzi started back in 1978. Prior to that, I was living in the UK and riding to work and back on a Suzuki 750 with a chain drive in the UK, rains every week, changing the chain every week, oiling it, greasing it. Decided I had to go for something with a shaft. And in those days, there wasn't much choice. It was a BMW or a BMW. And then, don't laugh, but I went to an agricultural show. And there were 3 cross motorcycles displaying the Moto Guzzi brand. And there was a Moto Guzzi Le Mans. And I just fell in love. Bought the Le Mans, 1978, still got it today, brought it out with me when I came out from the UK in 1983. And one of the first dealings I had with them and a little bit of their history was I met a guy who was actually looking at my Le Mans outside my house. And he worked for the racing shop in the factory and told me about Moto Guzzi building and developing a V8 racer. And I didn't know anything about it, didn't really understand what this guy was saying, but don't I wish now that I'd spent more time with him and understood a little bit more what he did. Anyway, I was a few years later, I was working in Italy and came across a 500 single for sale, an old military 500 single, a thing called a Super Alci. I bought that with a view that when I go on pension, I'll then restore this motorcycle. That also came out to South Africa with me in '83. Then a little bit later on, somebody got hold of me and told me about a Moto Guzzi Daytona for sale, which I bought. And then it's a disease. It's something that gets into your blood.
It's addictive, eh?
And a friend of mine said to me when we were flying overseas at one stage, he said to me, Phil, what are you going to do with this bike collection of yours? What's the theme going to be? And my answer to him was, I think the only theme I can have is collecting Moto Guzzis. And I guess if there's any goal, I'd love to own one Moto Guzzi model from each decade that they'd been in manufacture.
You must be quite close.
No, you think you get close, but finding a 1920s is tough. 30s is tough, 40s is tough. I've got 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and beyond 2010, I've got nothing between 2000 and 2010. So, yeah, so it's a disease, but what a disease to have.
But you've also told me that these models are starting to find you because people know that you have the passion for the Guzzi.
Yeah, and it's surprising how many there are in South Africa. There's most of the bikes I've got here were originally in South Africa as new bikes. The Daytona was, the Quota was, the 650 NTX was, and in fact some of the classics as well started in South Africa, particularly the Urcalino. A couple of the classics though have been brought over as a collection of wrecks, which I've then, for my sins, purchased and restored. But yeah.
And this V7 also found you?
This found me. Somebody phoned me up. I happened to be in the UK at the time, and they said, Phil, are you interested in purchasing a loop frame, which is the style of frame on these bikes, very low slung bikes and quite a heavy frame. are you interested in purchasing one? And I said, listen, I'm in the UK at the moment. I'm not really interested, I don't think. And I had in my mind that this bike would have been found under a tarpaulin, red rusty, and not very good condition. I then went into Motor Mecca, which was just round the back of Three Cross Motorcycles, and there was one of these for sale. And I couldn't believe the price sticker on the headlamp. So I said to the owner, how much would you actually sell this for? He says, what it says on the headlamp. They've really become cult bikes. They're sought after, you know. So anyway, I got back to South Africa and the guy phoned again, are you interested in buying this thing? And eventually I went through to see him. And this was in his lounge. And I couldn't believe it. So the deal was done. Purchased it and got it home, got it started. One or two little bits needed to be done on the bike, but very little really. And the guy in the UK said to me, when they tick over, they're as sweet as a nut. And they really are. Maybe a bit later we'll start this one up, get it warmed up and let it tick over. You can always count the RPM.
Yeah. All right. Okay, the other thing is that you use your spare time wisely and you actually restore bikes. Now, which models have you just restored recently? I've seen 3 standing around here.
You may see them a bit later. The latest one I've finished off was the Super Alci, which is the one I bought in Italy in '79. That's a 500 single. As Dietmar mentioned, the V-twin engine, which started as this 1967 version of the Ambassador, has now run for 50 years, just about. Moto Guzzi's 100 years old, and for the first 50 years, their iconic motor was the horizontal 500 single.
Yeah.
External flywheel, everybody knows the Falcone, and but there were many different versions. They reduced its size to 250, they made 350s, and they made 500s. And my Super Alci is just one of those 500s in its development. The last 500s they made were built in 1974, so they actually overlapped the V-twins, you know.
And this last little project, that little scooter, that beige one?
That's a thing called a Galetto, which means cockerel. It was Moto Guzzi's answer to the scooter craze. Obviously scooters were developed in Italy by Vespa and Lambretta, and they were cheap transport, and they got the girls on the bikes and with their dresses and everything else, and they could get to work and back. Guzzi's answer was typical Carlo Guzzi, I can gather. He looked at it and said, yeah, that's very nice, but it should have big wheels. And he went off on his own tangent and produced a big-wheeled, fully fared, fully enclosed motorcycle, easy to start, easy to ride. And the one I've got is a 1950 model, which is a 160 3-speed. Quite rare because they only made it for a year. The motor size increased, they went to a 4-speed box, and they built 300,000 or something. It was a huge number were built.
Yeah.
But an interesting little motorcycle. Got some very interesting features on it, which...
Yeah, this is one of the things that spoke to me, is that, you know, I shared in this journey we had falling in love with this brand, I shared about the history of Guzzi and being the first motorcycle brand using wind tunnels, and they produced the V8, and they have so many innovations. The first center stand was actually Guzzi. Now, we all know the iconic Ducati 916, and everyone's raving about the single-sided swing arm. Now you need to see this little baby. It's got a single-sided swing arm, and it's from the what, 50s?
1950.
50s with single-sided swing arm. You even got the eccentric lever to do the chain tension and that. Another cool thing about that is that it's got a gear indicator. Now, maybe not digital or on a TFT display, but it's super cool. So I think when that project's done, that restoration, we really need to have a look at her in more detail. Now, Phil, thank you for that. I could listen to your stories all day, but I think what we'll do is we'll do that with a cup of coffee afterwards. Now, back to this bike. I mean, we've reviewed the first edition racer of the V7 2012. We've had a look at the third edition Carbon, as well as the latest version called the fourth evolution in the Centenario. Now, they're quite different, but still the same. Let's go through the specs, what makes this so unique, the early launch ones.
Yeah, this bike goes back obviously to 60s technology, so you've got drum brakes, but on the front it's got twin leading shoe. Not very effective compared to discs of today. Single big headlamp, 6-inch headlamp. Yeah. It's got old school analog clocks. This version's got the twin clocks on it, being the Ambassador. Obviously starter motor, with no kickstart facility at all, so you were stuck if the battery went flat.
You were saying it was the first real one that had no kickstart.
I believe so, yeah. It didn't come with a kickstart. You think of the old British bikes of this era, they might have had electric start eventually, but they also had a kickstart as well.
Yeah.
And some of the Japanese bikes even had a kickstart under the seat that you could put on. That was the old Kawasaki's.
And that iconic motor, this is where it all
the V-twin motor, built in Moto Guzzi, cast in Moto Guzzi, sandcast. Crankcases, you'll see on this one, it's an early version of the crankcase with just the 3 external strengthening ribs, which became later on they strengthened it up even further with some horizontal strengthening ribs, and it became the waffle crankcase. The gearbox on this one is the 4-speed gearbox. Again, just a smooth sandcast casing, no strengthening ribs of the later 5-speed, which obviously then became the 6-speed. Drum brake at the back. Obviously the saving grace of Moto Guzzi's perhaps is the shaft drive, lack of chain, lack of maintenance, clean. The tunnel for the rear swing arm is used for the cardan shaft to drive the rear wheel. There's some quality componentry here. Boreani aluminium rims, those sort of things that stand out, And when you look at the quality of the parts on this motorcycle, I know this one's been restored, but the polishing of the aluminium brake drums, the polishing of the cylinder head rocker covers and that sort of thing, it really does just explain what Moto Guzzi was about. They were never cheap and never intended to be.
Yeah. No, but what's iconic, I mean, we've along the journey we compared 2 specials, V7 specials from 2012 versus the latest special, the 850, the blue one. And as you can see, the similarities, both of those specials had the spoked wheels, front and back, okay, the difference being disc brake, front and back, but they also had the dual clocks, mainly analog with a little LCD display inside, single headlight. The tank is virtually the same shape, I think also similar capacities, about 20 liters. Yep. Spoked wheel at the back, the iconic transverse motor. This being a 750, 753,
this
somewhere
is a
there?
750, second series really. The first series was just over 700cc.
So the latest incarnation being just the 850, but the same layout, same look and feel, I think the same characteristics while riding, just slightly refined. Now also the shaft drive, iconic, the dual exhaust coming out either side. Obviously the change from a 4-speed became a 5, is now a 6-speed. So all round, if you put that next to a special of today, you can clearly see they brother or sister, they siblings.
Grandfather and grandchild, maybe.
Yeah, more like that. Great granddaddy.
Yeah.
On a final note, a little nugget of truth, this being the V7 Ambassador was actually initially produced for the American market and then later for the rest of the world. For us in South Africa, a little clue that gives it away is these reflectors, orange and red at the back. In South Africa, we don't have them. When we import American bikes or American produced bike for the American market, they always on the bike. But that's this. I hope you enjoyed this episode with us, Phil. Thank you very much for your time, your opportunity for us to see your awesome toys, your awesome collection. Guys, remember to give us a like and subscribe and follow us on Route 21. Having played with her in the sun, we just had to let you hear this beautiful and iconic sound.